Hello, my dear ones. My name is Grace. I've lived many years, and today, for the first time, I will share the truth of my life, a story that has stayed locked in silence for 28 years. What you are about to hear may shake you to your very core, but it is a truth that must be told. The wrinkles on my face have deepened over the years, but they carry the stories of a woman who has lived through darkness, a woman who has felt the weight of betrayal, fear, and pain, a woman who has witnessed unspeakable horrors and has carried them in the depths of her heart. For years, I have lived in the shadows, hidden from the world, keeping secrets that should have never been buried. But today, I step into the light, because the truth cannot remain buried any longer. A true story. Of a time in my life that few would believe if I told them. A story of innocence lost, of vows broken, and of an escape that changed everything. A story of 5 young women, my sisters in faith, and me, and how we found the courage to climb over convent walls and vanish into the night. But what led us to that moment? What twisted darkness hid behind the sacred walls of the convent, a place we once believed was our refuge? And why did we feel we had no choice but to disappear, leaving behind the only life we knew? This isn't a story of shaken faith. It's not about questioning God or our vows. It's much darker. This is the story of a man who wore the cloak of holiness, but who, in reality, was a devil in disguise. A story about secrets that were buried deep, too deep to even whisper about, until now. For all these years, I've carried the burden alone. But today, I'll finally share with you the truth that we couldn't speak before. And I will do so because I've learned that sometimes the only way to heal is to speak, to tell your story, no matter how painful. I entered the convent in 1979. At the age of 16, I was full of hope, full of faith. I thought I had found my calling, my purpose in life. I chose the convent because I believed it would bring me closer to God. And for a while it did. The daily prayers, the quiet routine, the sense of belonging. It was a life I thought I was meant for. I remember the sound of the chapel bell ringing every morning, calling us to prayer, reminding us of our vows. I remember the sisters. We were 5 of us, united by faith, bound together by the same love for God. Mother Agnes, the Mother Superior, was a strict but kind woman. She was the one who kept us together, who kept us safe, or so we thought. But something began to change. At first it was subtle, small things we brushed off. Father Michael, the new priest who arrived when I was in my 5th year, was a man of great presence. He had a commanding voice that echoed through the church. Everyone admired him, but I felt something was off. His touch lingered a little too long on our shoulders during confession. His eyes when they met ours were too intense, too hungry, and I was not the only one who felt this. Sister Sarah, the youngest among us, began to avoid him, but we said nothing. We didn't dare. Who would believe us? After all, he was a priest. He had the power of the church behind him. We were just nuns. We had no voice, and so we kept quiet. We prayed, we did our duties, but the unease never left. It only grew stronger. In those days, the convent felt more like a prison. The walls that were meant to protect us began to feel like they were closing in, suffocating us, and yet no one spoke. No one could, not until one fateful night, when everything changed. If you believe in the power of truth, please subscribe and stay with me as I unfold this harrowing tale. There are many stories like mine, stories that need to be heard, stories that demand to be told. Together, we can break the silence. The convent in those early days was everything I had ever dreamed of. It was a place of peace, a sanctuary where the world outside seemed to vanish. Every morning, the bell rang at 5 a.m. and we all rose from our beds, the stillness of the night clinging to us. We gathered in the chapel, kneeling before the altar, our prayers rising to the heavens, each one of us lost in our own thoughts, our hearts lifted in devotion. The smell of incense filled the air, the faint echoes of our voices harmonizing as we chanted together. There was a sense of tranquility in the convent, a sense of purpose. Each day had its routine, prayers, work, silence. It was a life of discipline, yes, but it also offered something more, a sense of belonging, a sense of being part of something greater than myself. I was young when I entered the convent, just 16. The outside world seemed too loud, too chaotic, and I longed for something simpler. I had always been a quiet girl, more comfortable in solitude than among crowds. My decision to join was driven by a deep desire to serve God, to give my life to something pure, something that would fill the emptiness I often felt. The sisters were kind, each one with their own unique way of living the life we had chosen. Mother Agnes, our superior, was strict but fair. She had a way of commanding respect without raising her voice. Her presence was comforting, like the steady hand of a mother guiding her children. Sister Eleanor was our scholar, always immersed in the religious texts. Her mind was sharp, and she would often share her insights with the rest of us. Sister Joy was our heart. Her laughter filled the halls, and she had a way of making even the hardest tasks feel light. Sister Sarah, the youngest among us, was a gentle soul. Shy, sweet, and always eager to help. She was the newest member of our small community. And then there was me, the silent observer. Always watching, always listening, but rarely speaking. My mother used to say I had a keen insight, able to see beyond the obvious. Perhaps that's why I noticed things that the others didn't. Small things that didn't seem right at first. But as time went on, they began to weigh heavier on my heart. It started with the subtle changes. The way Father Michael would linger a little too long during confession, the way his eyes would linger on us, especially on Sister Sarah. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was reading too much into it. After all, he was a priest, a man of God. Surely I was overthinking things. But there was something in his presence that unsettled me. Father Michael was a new addition to our convent, arriving when I was in my 5th year of religious life. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could command a room. He was always polite, respectful, but there was an intensity in his gaze that I couldn't quite place. His arrival was met with excitement. He was a man of authority, someone who was supposed to guide us in our spiritual journeys. But as time passed, the subtle discomfort I felt grew. His visits to the convent became more frequent. At first, he would come during Mass, giving sermons that moved the congregation, his words filled with passion. But soon it wasn't just his sermons that drew attention. He started asking questions during confession that were oddly personal. He'd ask about our past lives before the convent, about our families, our thoughts, our feelings. In a place where silence was sacred, his curiosity seemed out of place. His touch during those confessions, brief but lingering, left me uneasy. And it wasn't just me. Sister Sarah, the youngest among us, began to avoid him. I noticed the way she would flinch whenever he came near her, the way she would shrink back in his presence. But no one spoke. How could we? Father Michael was a man of the cloth. He had the authority of the church behind him. Who would believe us? We were just nuns, after all, living under vows of silence, obedience, and humility. It seemed impossible that anyone would listen if we spoke out. And so we kept our discomfort to ourselves, burying it deep, hoping it would go away. As the days turned into months, the unease continued to build. Father Michael's influence over the convent grew stronger, his presence more commanding. He would call Sister Sarah into his office for private talks, and when she came out, her face was often pale, her eyes wide with fear. I asked her once what had happened, but she simply shook her head, refusing to speak. The rest of the sisters were quiet too. There was an unspoken understanding that we weren't supposed to talk about it. After all, Father Michael was a priest, a man of the church. He was supposed to be a guide for us, a leader. But with each passing day, I felt the walls of the convent closing in, suffocating me. And I knew, deep down, that something had to give. It was during those early months that I realized just how much I had come to depend on the other sisters for my own sense of security. Sister Eleanor's sharp mind, Sister Joy's infectious laughter, and Sister Sarah's gentle kindness, they were my family. They were the only people I could trust, the only people who understood the life we had chosen. Together, we formed a bond that felt unbreakable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The convent, which once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. And Father Michael, once a source of comfort, now felt like a shadow hovering over us, his intentions hidden behind a veil of holiness. The arrival of Father Michael was something we all anticipated with a mix of excitement and curiosity. We were a small, tight-knit group, and change didn't come often. The convent had been without a priest for some time, and now, with Father Michael's arrival, we were told that he would be taking on the responsibility of leading our spiritual guidance. He was tall, with a deep, resonant voice that commanded attention whenever he spoke. His presence in the chapel was undeniable. His sermons were powerful, filled with authority, and people in the community took to him instantly. At first, I welcomed him. It felt reassuring to have a new, strong figure in the convent. I was young and still filled with idealism, believing that such changes were part of God's plan. Father Michael seemed to be everything a priest should be: compassionate, knowledgeable, and always eager to offer help to those in need. But I soon began to notice things that made my skin crawl, things I couldn't quite put my finger on, but which troubled me nonetheless. It started with the way he looked at us. His gaze wasn't the kind that conveyed respect or the care of a spiritual guide. There was something in it, something that lingered too long, too intense, as if he were studying us, not just as his fellow servants of God, but as something more. I would catch him watching us in the corners of the chapel, his eyes fixed for longer than was comfortable. And it wasn't just me. I saw the way his gaze made Sister Sarah uneasy. She was young, still a novice, and Father Michael seemed to focus on her more than any of the other sisters. I tried to dismiss my unease at first. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, he was a priest. He was supposed to be above reproach, right? But the more I observed, the more I noticed his subtle manipulations. His questions during confession became more personal, probing deeper into our lives before the convent. It felt wrong. There was an intimacy in his inquiries that felt inappropriate, as if he were attempting to gain control over us in some way. His words, though never openly offensive, seemed to test the boundaries, pushing us into uncomfortable territory. One evening, after Mass, Father Michael pulled Sister Sarah aside. I noticed the nervousness in her steps as she walked with him toward his office. She had been acting differently since his arrival, quieter, more withdrawn. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that she was simply adjusting to the new environment. But when she returned, her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. She didn't speak a word to any of us that night, and I could tell she was avoiding eye contact with me. The next morning, I approached her in the garden, hoping to offer some comfort. I asked if everything was all right, but she only nodded, a weak smile on her face. When I pressed her, she shrugged it off, saying it was just the pressure of settling into a new role as the youngest sister. But I could see the subtle tremor in her hands, the way her voice wavered. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. As the days passed, Father Michael's presence became harder to ignore. His visits to the convent grew more frequent. He would often pull one of us aside for a private conversation, always with a reason that seemed harmless at first. Sometimes he wanted to discuss the upkeep of the chapel, or the health of the vegetable garden, or even the state of the local community. But these talks always took longer than expected. They weren't just about the practical matters of convent life. There was something else. Something that didn't belong. Sister Eleanor, the most intelligent of us all, began to notice it too. She would watch Father Michael closely whenever he spoke with any of the sisters, her sharp eyes catching the subtle signs that something was off. She confided in me one evening after Vespers, her voice low and filled with concern. "Grace," she said, "I don't know what it is, but there's something about him I can't shake. It's like he's trying to get too close, to learn things about us that he shouldn't know." I agreed, but we both felt powerless to act. After all, what could we say? Father Michael was our priest. He had the church's power behind him. His word would outweigh ours in any situation. And so we remained silent, each of us stewing in our discomfort, unable to do anything. Sister Joy, the most outwardly cheerful of us all, began to distance herself from Father Michael too. She seemed to avoid him whenever possible, and I noticed how her once constant laughter had started to fade. She became quieter, more somber, and her bright smile no longer lit up the halls. It wasn't long before we all began to realize the depth of Father Michael's influence. He no longer visited only during Mass or scheduled confession. He began to show up unannounced, always with some excuse. "I need help finding a certain book in the library," he'd say. Or, "The garden needs some herbs, would you mind helping me?" But it was always one of us at a time, and he always made sure that we were alone when he spoke with us. The tipping point came one night, late after prayers, when I saw something I could no longer ignore. Sister Sarah was standing in the hallway, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with terror as Father Michael stood before her, his hand resting too long on her arm. I had seen him do this before, the lingering touch that made everyone uncomfortable, but this time it felt different. He was closer to her than I had ever seen him with any of us, his words a whisper in her ear. When I stepped forward, I must have made a noise, because they both turned. Father Michael gave me a cold smile, his eyes narrowing, but it was Sarah's face that haunted me. She was trembling, her cheeks wet with tears. Without a word, she turned and rushed back to her room, and I too felt the cold grip of fear take hold of me. The convent that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a place of danger. Father Michael had gone from a quiet presence to someone who loomed over us, using his position to manipulate, intimidate, and isolate. I knew then that we could no longer remain silent. The storm we had been quietly waiting for had finally arrived. It happened one late evening, just after the final prayers of the day, when the convent was quiet and the air seemed thick with silence. We were all settling into our evening routine, some preparing for bed, others tending to the small chores that filled our nights when I heard footsteps in the hall. It was Father Michael. He had been visiting the convent almost daily now, each time under a different pretense. At first, I had convinced myself that his frequent visits were part of his duties, that he was only trying to help. But deep down, I could feel something shift within me every time he stepped through the door. On this night, however, it was different. I had been in the library, reviewing some texts, when I heard a faint sound, a soft cry that seemed to escape from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew it was Sister Sarah's voice. I rushed out of the library, following the sound of her distress. As I neared the hall, I caught a glimpse of Father Michael's tall figure standing in the dimly lit corridor, his hand gripping Sister Sarah's arm. She was pressed against the wall, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear, and her lips trembling as if she were trying to speak but couldn't. My heart stopped in that instant. I stood frozen, unsure whether to move forward or turn away, but the sight of Sarah, so vulnerable, so clearly frightened, spurred me into action. I moved closer, just a few steps, enough to see what was happening, but not enough to intervene directly. Father Michael's face was calm, almost serene, but his hand on Sister Sarah's arm was too tight, and his eyes held an intensity I had never seen before. The grip he had on her wasn't comforting or protective. It was controlling, possessive. He leaned closer, speaking in low, almost hushed tones, and I saw Sarah flinch under his touch. "Father Michael," I finally managed to call out, my voice shaking with fear. The words had escaped me before I had a chance to think, my fear now mixing with anger. He turned, his smile slipping only for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. He removed his hand from Sarah's arm, and she immediately took a few steps back, her hands trembling. She looked at me, but it was a look I would never forget. It was a look of shame, of pain. She didn't speak, only nodded slightly before retreating to her room, her steps hurried. Father Michael's smile returned, his calm demeanor never faltering. "Sister Grace," he said, his voice smooth, "you mustn't be concerned. Sister Sarah simply felt faint. I was merely helping her." I could feel the weight of his words, the manipulation buried beneath the surface. I wanted to shout, to accuse him of what I had just witnessed, but I held back. What could I say? How could I confront a man of God? Instead, I simply nodded and turned away, my heart hammering in my chest. As I walked back to my room, I could hear the sound of Sarah's sobs echoing through the walls, and it felt as though the very air inside the convent had thickened with fear. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the image of what I had seen. The sight of Father Michael's hand on Sister Sarah's arm, the way he had manipulated the situation with such ease, it haunted me. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, each time feeling a growing sense of unease, of horror, of something deep within me screaming that I should have done more. I tried to talk to Sister Sarah, but she avoided me. She had become more withdrawn, her eyes always avoiding mine. It was as though we were both trapped in the same silent understanding, unable to speak of the truth that hung between us. It was the silence that hurt the most, the unspoken words that weighed so heavily on my heart. I knew Sarah was afraid of Father Michael, afraid of what would happen if anyone found out. But I was just as afraid. I feared the repercussions of speaking out, feared that no one would believe me, or worse, that they would side with him. As the days passed, I watched my fellow sisters. Sister Eleanor seemed to sense my discomfort. I could see it in her eyes, the way she kept glancing over at me during our prayers, as if waiting for me to say something, anything. But I said nothing. I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I thought about confronting him, the doubts crept in. What if I was wrong? What if it was all just a misunderstanding? And then there was Sister Joy. She had noticed the change in Sarah, too. She'd often try to get her to speak, but Sarah would retreat into silence, offering nothing but a soft smile, her eyes betraying the fear she refused to acknowledge. The fear was becoming contagious. The air in the convent felt thicker, heavier. It wasn't just Father Michael anymore. It was the silence, the unspoken terror that loomed over us all. And with every passing day, I felt the weight of it pressing down on my shoulders. The mental strain was unbearable. I couldn't reconcile what I had seen with the life I had chosen. How could I continue to serve God when the very people who were supposed to guide us were the ones causing harm? I tried to pray, to seek solace in the silence of the chapel. But even there, I felt the walls closing in. I began to question everything I had believed in, my faith, my vows, my very purpose. How could I stand by and let this happen? How could I stay silent? But every time I considered speaking up, I was gripped by fear. Fear of being labeled a troublemaker, of destroying the only life I knew, of the church's power swallowing me whole. What could I do against a priest who was untouchable, a man cloaked in the authority of God? I had made a vow to serve him, to be his faithful servant. But now, I was torn between the vows I had taken and the truth I had seen with my own eyes. The fear that I might lose everything paralyzed me, and yet deep inside I knew I couldn't go on pretending. The breaking point came one evening when Sister Sarah's silence finally gave way. It was late, long after Vespers, when the rest of us had gone to our rooms. I had been sitting in the small library, unable to concentrate on the scriptures I was supposed to be reading. The images from that night, the way Father Michael had held Sarah, his touch lingering in a way no priest should, kept replaying in my mind. Then, I heard a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Sister Sarah standing there, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling as she clutched the edge of her habit. "Grace," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this anymore. I need to tell someone." In that moment, everything inside me froze. I knew what she was about to say, knew it with an aching certainty. "Sarah," I whispered back, stepping aside to let her in. "What happened?" She walked in and the words tumbled out in a rush like a dam breaking. She spoke of the things Father Michael had done, of the inappropriate touches, the whispers in the dark, and the way he used his position to make her feel small, insignificant. She told me about the times he had cornered her, touching her in ways that no priest should, his promises of guidance twisted into threats, his kindness warped into manipulation. The horror of what she said hit me like a cold wave. I felt numb, my mind racing, but unable to find the words to comfort her. What could I say? What could I do? "I'm so sorry," I finally whispered, my heart breaking for her. I reached out to hold her, but she pulled away. "I'm scared, Grace," she said. "I'm scared of what will happen if we speak out. I'm scared of what Father Michael will do. He's too powerful. Will never be believed." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I had been afraid too, afraid of confronting him, afraid of being silenced, of losing everything I had worked for. But as I looked at Sarah, my heart broke for her. She was so young, so vulnerable, and all I wanted to do was protect her. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling, "I promise you we will do something. We can't let him continue hurting us. We can't stay silent anymore." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for reassurance. But there was no easy way out. The decision had to be made, and it couldn't wait any longer. The next few days were a blur of confusion and fear. I spent every waking moment torn between my loyalty to my faith and my need to protect the sisters. I knew what had to be done, but the weight of the decision was crushing. How could I turn my back on everything I had worked for? How could I stand up against a priest, a man of God, without destroying my own soul? I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's face that night, her words still echoing in my mind. I couldn't let her suffer in silence anymore, and I couldn't let Father Michael's reign of terror continue. But how would we escape? How would we leave without drawing attention to ourselves? That night I went to see Sister Eleanor. She was the only one who might understand, who might help, but I knew she would be just as hesitant as I was. She had always been the one to keep her thoughts close to her chest, never one to act impulsively. I found her in the garden, walking slowly, her gaze lost in the distance. When she saw me approaching, she paused and smiled faintly, though there was a sadness in her eyes that mirrored my own. "Grace," she said, her voice calm but tired. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, the words heavy in my throat, but I knew I couldn't carry this burden alone anymore. "Eleanor, I think it's time. We need to leave." Her eyes widened and she stepped closer. "What do you mean?" "Father Michael," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What he's doing? We can't let him keep hurting us. I've seen enough. We have to escape before it's too late." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing, her eyes searching my face for signs of uncertainty. Finally, she spoke. "You're right. I've seen the signs too. I've noticed how he isolates the younger sisters, how he makes them feel small. But leaving? Grace, do you realize what we're talking about? Leaving the convent? Breaking our vows? I know, I replied, the weight of it settling heavily on my chest. But staying here in this prison, it's killing us. We can't let him do this anymore. We have to protect ourselves. We have to protect Sarah. Eleanor remained silent for a long time, the decision clearly weighing on her. But after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. You're right. But how do we do this? How do we get out? I felt a rush of relief that she was finally on board, but it was short-lived. The danger was far from over. Father Michael's hold on the convent was strong, and escaping would be no easy feat. We'll have to be careful, I said, my voice trembling with the enormity of what we were about to do. I'll gather evidence, small things I've seen, notes, times, anything that can help. We'll need proof if we ever want to make our escape permanent. We'll have to plan carefully, quietly, and move quickly before he realizes what's happening. Eleanor nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was scared just as I was. The stakes were high, and there was no turning back once we took that first step. The days that followed were filled with tension and quiet planning. Father Michael's behavior became more erratic, more invasive. He began pulling the sisters aside more frequently, taking advantage of every opportunity to isolate them. His power was growing, and his arrogance was becoming clear. The more he thought he was untouchable, the bolder his actions became. It was the perfect storm. And we, trapped in the eye of it, knew we had no choice. The risk of staying was too great. The risk of not acting was even greater. The plan was set in motion under the cover of darkness. But even then, the weight of what we were about to do was unbearable. As the day drew to a close, the familiar sounds of the convent, footsteps in the hallways, the soft murmur of evening prayers, felt suffocating. I had never experienced a moment of silence quite like this. The air was thick with anticipation, with fear, and with the knowledge that once we stepped outside those walls, there would be no turning back. We had discussed our escape countless times in hushed whispers, careful to avoid anyone overhearing. The convent was supposed to be a sanctuary, but for us it had become a prison. We had no choice but to leave. Our survival depended on it. Father Michael's behavior had escalated to the point where it was impossible to ignore. His manipulations had grown more insidious, his control over the sisters tightening with each passing day. Sister Sarah, the youngest of us, had already started to wither under the pressure. Every day her fear became more palpable, and it wasn't just her fear. It was all of us. We could feel it, see it in each other's eyes. There was no other choice but to escape. We have to leave tonight, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If we wait any longer, it'll be too late. Sister Eleanor, who had been my confidant through all of this, nodded solemnly. It's now or never. Once we go, we can't come back. There will be no safety net, no one to catch us. We had decided that the best time to escape would be just after midnight, when the convent would be asleep, and the night was at its darkest. The plan was simple, but the stakes were high. We would sneak out through the back door of the convent, hidden behind the thick ivy that grew around the stone walls. We had been careful in the days leading up to this moment, scouting out every possible route, every hidden path, but nothing could prepare us for the moment we actually began to put it into motion. The emotional toll of leaving the convent was immense. As I packed the few belongings I could carry, only what was necessary, I couldn't help but reflect on everything I was leaving behind. The life I had built in this place, the vows I had taken, the faith that had once seemed so certain. I had devoted my entire existence to this convent, to serving God, and now I was betraying it all. The weight of my vows pressed heavily on me. I could hear the faint sound of the chapel bell ringing, signaling the hour of the night. The familiar rhythm that had once been a comfort now felt like a haunting reminder of the life I was abandoning. I had made a vow to serve God, to dedicate my life to the convent and its ways. But now I was choosing to leave it all behind. I felt a pang of guilt deep in my chest, but it was swallowed by the overwhelming feeling of fear and desperation. "Grace," Sister Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm scared. What if we get caught? What if he finds out?" I turned to her, seeing the fear in her eyes. She was young, and the weight of what we were doing seemed to bear down on her more heavily than the rest of us. She had only just joined the convent, and her innocence made this escape feel like a betrayal, not only to the vows we had taken, but to the life she had once hoped for. I placed my hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort, though I too was afraid. "Sarah, we're doing this for you. For all of us. We can't stay here anymore. We can't let him hurt you, hurt any of us. We're doing the right thing." The rest of the sisters, too, had their own struggles. Sister Eleanor, with her sharp mind, had been instrumental in helping us plan the escape, but even she could not shake the guilt of what we were about to do. She had always been the one who sought knowledge, who believed in the power of truth and faith. But now, as she looked at us, at me, there was an uncertainty in her eyes. She knew that this was our only option, but that didn't make it any easier. "I never thought it would come to this," she said softly, as we gathered near the back door. "I never imagined I would leave this life, but we have no choice. We can't allow him to have that power over us anymore." We all nodded, understanding her words, even as we struggled with our own feelings. The life we had chosen had been sacred to us, and now we were forced to abandon it in order to survive. We weren't just running from Father Michael. We were running from everything we had known. The convent had been our home, our refuge, our purpose, and now we were turning our backs on it. We quietly moved through the dark halls, our footsteps muffled on the worn wooden floors. Each step felt like a betrayal, but each step also felt like a breath of freedom. The air in the convent had become suffocating, and the walls seemed to press in on us with every passing day. But the night was our chance. We would leave the convent walls behind, and with it, the life that had imprisoned us for far too long. The fear of getting caught was always in the back of our minds, but we pressed on, driven by the need to escape. We reached the back door, and I felt a surge of relief when I saw the ivy-covered wall that would provide our only means of escape. The branches of the ivy were thick, and though the climb would be difficult, it would be our only way out. Sister Joy was the first to climb, her hands gripping the rough stones as she scaled the wall. She was surprisingly strong for her size, and soon she was on the other side, helping the rest of us climb. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the others follow one by one. The weight of what we were doing was heavy, but the promise of freedom urged us on. When it was my turn, I hesitated for only a moment before climbing up after them. My hands were shaking as I grasped the ivy-covered stones, but I kept my focus. The fear of being caught was now secondary to the need to escape. Every moment that passed felt like a step closer to freedom, and though I knew I would never be able to return, I felt the lightness of hope begin to replace the heaviness of the life I was leaving behind. We all made it over the wall, our feet hitting the soft earth on the other side. We didn't speak as we hurried through the darkness, our breath heavy in the cool night air. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. As we walked away from the convent, I couldn't help but feel the emotional weight of what we had done. We had abandoned everything, the vows, the life we had committed to, and even the faith that had once given us purpose. But we had no choice. This was the only way we could survive, the only way to reclaim the life that had been stolen from us. We were free. But at what cost? The days following our escape blurred into one another, each one marked by a quiet anxiety and an overwhelming sense of displacement. We were no longer the women we had been, no longer the nuns who had lived under the same sacred roof for so many years. In a way, the convent had been our home, our sanctuary, And now, it felt as though we had been exiled from our very selves. We had traded one prison for another, except this one didn't have walls or bars. This one was invisible, and yet it pressed down on us more heavily than anything we had known before. The night we fled was just the beginning. What followed was a harsh, unforgiving reality, one where we could never fully feel safe, where every stranger's glance made our hearts race, and every knock at the door sent shivers down our spines. Our new identities were the first thing we had to create. We had no choice. If we were going to survive, we had to hide. From Father Michael, from the authorities, from the very life we had once known. Our new names were simple: Linda Peterson, Catherine Rose, Emily Rodriguez, and Millie Evans. These were the names we would now carry, the lives we would adopt. At first, they felt like lies, hollow names that didn't belong to any of us. We had been Sister Grace, Sister Eleanor, Sister Joy, and Sister Martha for so long that the transition was jarring. We weren't just leaving behind our convent life. We were leaving behind ourselves. We weren't just changing our names. We were changing who we were at our core. As we settled into a small, nondescript town, everything felt foreign. The simplest things seemed impossible: buying groceries, understanding how to use a telephone, navigating public transport. Things that we had never needed to know before became the biggest obstacles to our survival. The outside world was so different from the one we had known, and it felt like a cruel joke. It was supposed to be a place of freedom, but all we felt was the weight of the unknown. I remember the first time I used a public phone. It took me what felt like an eternity to figure out how to dial. I kept pressing the wrong buttons, unsure of how to make the call, and the fear that someone might see me, might recognize me, gripped my chest. For years, we had been taught to rely on God and the other sisters for everything. Now, I was forced to rely on a strange, unfeeling world that didn't know who I was, and didn't care. I was filled with shame and guilt every time I tried to blend into the crowd. I would find myself staring at the people around me, wondering if they could tell. Could they see the truth behind our false names? Could they tell that we had been nuns? That we had abandoned our vows? That we were now fugitives running from the very life we had sworn to uphold? The trauma from the convent followed us like a shadow. We had escaped the physical walls, but the emotional walls we had built up over the years remained intact. The nightmares came at night, vivid and terrifying. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In those moments, it felt as though I had never left, as though I was still trapped in that hell, still hiding in the shadows, still afraid of being found. Sister Sarah, in particular, struggled the most. The trauma of Father Michael's abuse weighed heavily on her, and she often woke up crying, her body shaking with the terror of the past. She had been the most vulnerable, the youngest, and the fear of what had been done to her haunted her every day. There were times when she would stare at the walls, lost in her own mind, and I would have to pull her out of her thoughts, gently reminding her that we were free, that we had survived. But the guilt never left. We had left our lives behind, our vows, our faith. We had escaped to survive, but it came at a cost. There were times when I would question myself. Was it worth it? Had we done the right thing? We had fled, yes, but we had also broken something inside ourselves. The convent had been a part of us, and leaving it, abandoning it, felt like tearing apart a piece of our soul. There were moments when I would walk down the street, blending in with the crowd, and I would catch a glimpse of a church steeple in the distance. It would remind me of the life we had left behind. I would think of the sisters, of the vows we had taken, and I would feel the weight of them press down on me. Had we betrayed them? Had we betrayed ourselves? In those early days of hiding, we had little to our names. We lived in a small one-room apartment, and we all took turns looking for work. We had no qualifications, no experience in the outside world, but we had to make it work. We had to find a way to survive, to rebuild our lives from scratch. I found a job at a local bakery, cleaning dishes and sweeping floors. It was humbling work, and I was grateful for it, but the physical labor felt foreign to me. I had spent my entire life in the convent, tending to the garden, assisting with the cooking. But this was different. Here, I was just another worker, just another woman trying to make ends meet. There were no prayers, no comforting rituals, just the monotony of daily life. Sister Eleanor found work at a small library, helping to catalog books. Sister Joy worked as a caretaker for an elderly woman, and Sister Sarah found a job at a nearby market, helping to stock shelves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. Every day was a struggle. Every moment felt like we were walking on the edge of a razor. We could be discovered at any time, and the fear of that discovery made every step we took feel like an impossible one. But we persevered, because we had no other choice. We had come too far, sacrificed too much to turn back now. In the evenings, we would gather together in our small apartment, our faces lit by the dim light of a single lamp, and talk. We spoke of our past lives, of the convent, of what we had left behind. But we also spoke of our future. We spoke of the hope that one day we would be free from the ghosts of our past, that we would find peace again. And in those quiet moments I could see it. The glimmer of hope in Sarah's eyes, the determination in Eleanor's. We had survived, and we would continue to survive, together. But even as we built a new life, I couldn't help but feel that the emotional cost of it all was too great. We were free, yes, but the scars of our past were etched deep into our souls, and no matter how far we ran, they would never fade. The years that followed our escape passed in a blur, each one dragging by as we clung to the fragile illusion of freedom. Living in hiding had become our reality. We had no choice but to adopt new lives, new identities, and new routines. But no matter how much we tried to bury the past, it remained with us, a shadow that we could never outrun. We had created new names: Linda Peterson, Catherine Rose, Emily Rodriguez, and Millie Evans. And in those names, we tried to find new identities. On the surface, we lived like anyone else. We went to work, paid our bills, and tried to blend in. But inside, we were still the women who had once lived in the convent, bound by vows we had broken, by a past we could never fully escape. At first, it was a relief to simply be out of the convent, away from Father Michael, away from the suffocating walls that had trapped us for so long. The world outside seemed vast, full of possibility, but as the days turned into weeks, then months, and then years, that sense of freedom began to feel more like a cage of its own. Every new job, every new place we moved to, felt like another lie we had to tell. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, always afraid that someone might discover who we really were. Our new identities were a fragile facade, one we had to protect at all costs. The mental strain of living with a constant fear of exposure was exhausting. Every conversation, every glance from a stranger, every news report about missing persons or religious scandals, each one triggered a deep, visceral fear that our past would catch up with us. And yet, we carried on. We had no choice. We found work in small, nondescript jobs, washing dishes, working in grocery stores, cleaning houses. We had no qualifications, no degrees, no real skills beyond what we had learned in the convent. We worked hard, doing whatever we could to survive, but it never felt like enough. Sister Eleanor worked at a small library, organizing books and cataloging them. It was quiet work, and it gave her time to think, to read. She often disappeared into books, escaping into worlds far removed from the reality of our lives. Sister Joy found work as a caregiver for elderly women, taking care of people who, like us, had experienced loss. She had a natural way with people, a warmth that made her perfect for the job. But she too carried the weight of the past in her eyes. Sister Sarah, the youngest, found work in a small market, stocking shelves and bagging groceries. She was shy, her face always flushed with embarrassment when someone spoke to her. The trauma of what she had endured in the convent never left her, and the memories would come to her in flashes, haunting her every step. But she pushed through it, just as we all did. As for me, I worked as a cleaner in a bakery. It was menial work, but it allowed me to disappear into the background. No one asked questions. No one cared about who I was or where I came from. It was a simple life, but it was safe. And for all the years we lived in hiding, safety became our highest priority. But no matter how hard we tried to live normal lives, there was always a part of us that felt broken. We had abandoned everything. The vows we had made, the faith that had once defined us. We had walked away from a life that, for better or worse, had been our entire world. The guilt weighed on me more than I could ever express. I would lie awake at night, my mind racing, wondering if we had made the right choice. Was escaping the convent truly the only way, or had we betrayed everything we had once believed in? I thought about the sisters we had lost over the years. Sister Martha, who had died from a stroke while we were in hiding, and Sister Eleanor, who had passed away quietly from cancer. They had been the pillars of our convent life, and their deaths felt like a betrayal of the lives they had given. We had left them behind. We had abandoned them to the very institution that had allowed the abuse to continue. Every time we lost one of our own, the guilt became more unbearable. I could still see them in my mind. Sister Martha with her soft, wrinkled hands, always baking bread for the poor. Sister Eleanor with her sharp intellect and quiet wisdom. Sister Joy with her laughter that filled the halls of the convent. And Sarah, the youngest, who had been so full of life and hope, now lost to the shadows of the past. As the years passed, the emotional toll of our decision grew heavier. We had been forced to abandon our lives in the convent, but the lives we had built in hiding were not without sacrifice. I found myself questioning everything. Was it worth it? Was it worth the pain of losing the sisters we had once called family? Was it worth the years of living in fear, knowing that every day we walked outside, we were one step closer to being discovered? The internal conflict gnawed at me. I had once believed that I had made the right decision, that escaping was the only way to survive. But now, as the years wore on, I found myself doubting everything. How could we have been so sure? How could we have abandoned everything we had known and loved? The faith that had once been so certain now seemed fragile, a distant memory. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I would remember the convent, the early days when life had felt so simple, so pure. I remembered the sound of the bells, the peaceful rhythm of prayer, the sense of purpose that had filled my heart. But then I would remember Father Michael, the darkness that had crept into our lives, the betrayal that had stained everything. It was in those moments of reflection that I realized the truth. The convent, with all its sacredness, had become a place of suffering, a place of fear. Father Michael's influence had turned our sanctuary into a prison, and in that prison, we had lost ourselves. The emotional trauma of those years, of the abuse, the escape, and the years spent in hiding, was something we would carry with us forever. We couldn't outrun it, no matter how far we went, but we had survived. And in that survival, there was a kind of strength that I never thought we could find. We had left the convent, but we had carried it with us, locked inside our hearts. It would never be fully gone, but as I looked at the lives we had built, the small homes we had made for ourselves, the new identities we had adopted, I realized that we had done the impossible. We had found a way to live, to breathe, to move forward, and in that there was hope. We were no longer just survivors. We were living, breathing women, carving out a future for ourselves, one day at a time. After 28 years, the weight of silence became unbearable. For so long, I had carried the truth like a stone in my chest, buried so deep that it seemed almost impossible to unearth. But the time had come. The time to speak out, to confront the past, to finally let the truth rise to the surface. The years of hiding had taught me many things about survival, about strength, and about the scars that we carry with us. But the most important thing I had learned was that silence only protects the oppressors, and I couldn't keep protecting him anymore. I couldn't keep protecting the institution that had allowed him to thrive, to harm us, and to destroy so many lives. I had spent years questioning whether I should speak out. The fear had always been there. Fear of the church's power, fear of the backlash, fear of being disbelieved. But as the years passed, I found that fear was no longer enough to silence me. I had seen enough of the world to know that truth was powerful, that it could break chains and heal wounds. I had also seen enough to know that no matter how much time passed, the truth would always find a way to come to the surface. And if I didn't act, I would die carrying this burden alone. I had been gathering evidence for years, small things at first, notes I had taken, times, dates, fragments of conversations, anything I could hold on to. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had kept it all hidden, locked away, because even in my new life, I still feared that speaking the truth might bring the wrath of the church down on us. But I had come to realize that silence was its own kind of prison. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my small apartment, I finally made the decision. I would go back. I would return to Havenwood, to the very place where it had all started. I had spent decades running from that place, but I couldn't hide anymore. I had to face the past, confront it head-on. It was the only way to find peace, to finally reclaim the part of me that had been stolen all those years ago. The emotional weight of returning to that place was almost too much to bear. Havenwood had been a place of both refuge and torment for me. It had been a sanctuary of faith, but it had also become a prison. It had once been home, but now it was a place of pain. I could still see the convent in my mind, the stone walls, the chapel where we had prayed every day, the garden where we had worked side by side. I could hear the echo of the bells that had once called us to prayer, and the sound of Father Michael's voice, filled with authority and power. As I prepared to return, I felt a surge of emotion. Anger, fear, sorrow, and guilt all mingling together. I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid of what I might have to face, but I was also determined I had to go back, for me, for the other sisters who had been silenced, for the women who had been harmed and whose voices had never been heard. I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who would believe me, someone who would help me expose the truth. That's when I reached out to Father John. Father John was a young priest who had recently arrived in Havenwood. He was different from the other priests I had known. He was compassionate, kind, and had a sense of justice that I had rarely seen in the church. He had been appointed to assist Father Michael after his health had begun to decline, and something about him felt different. I found a way to meet with him, arranging to see him after Mass. I was nervous, unsure of how he would react. But when I told him my story, his eyes softened with sympathy and understanding. "Father Michael, he did all of this?" he asked quietly, disbelief evident in his voice. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "And the church knew. They covered it up. They allowed him to continue, and they silenced us. I have the evidence, Father. I've kept it hidden all these years. But I can't keep it buried anymore." Father John listened intently, his face serious as I recounted everything. He didn't interrupt, didn't question me, didn't try to dismiss what I was saying. He just listened. And for the first time in so many years, I felt heard. "I believe you," he said, his voice firm. "I'll help you. We need to expose this. The truth needs to come out, no matter what." In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone on my side. Father John promised to help me gather the evidence, to bring the story to the right people. People who would listen. People who could help bring justice. But I knew the road ahead would not be easy. Father Michael was still a powerful man in the community, and his influence stretched far beyond the convent walls. The church would fight back. They would deny everything, and they would try to discredit me. But I had waited long enough. I had lived in fear for too many years. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter the cost. The next few weeks were filled with tense meetings and careful planning. Father John and I worked together to gather as much evidence as we could. We contacted a journalist who had been covering stories of corruption within the church, and she agreed to investigate the case. We spoke to former members of the community, people who had witnessed the abuse but had been too afraid to speak out. Slowly, but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. The emotional weight of this decision was enormous. I had lived in hiding for so long, and now I was preparing to step back into the very place that had caused me so much pain. But as we gathered the evidence and prepared to expose the truth, I felt a sense of relief. I had spent 28 years running, but now I was finally standing up for myself, for the other sisters, and for the countless others who had suffered in silence. The past was never going to disappear. The scars would never fully heal, but by confronting it, by telling the truth, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for so long. It wasn't just about seeking justice anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice, reclaiming my life. It was time to return to Havenwood, to finally face the past, and to make sure the truth was heard. No more silence, no more hiding. As I sit here now, with the weight of so many years behind me, I can hardly believe how far we've come. There were times when I thought this day would never come, the day when I would finally speak the truth, when the horrors of the past would no longer haunt me in the silence of my heart. For 28 long years I carried this secret, this pain, this fear. I buried it deep, telling myself that speaking out would only make things worse, that the cost of revealing the truth was too great. But the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deep we bury it. And today, I can finally breathe easy, knowing that the truth is no longer a burden I carry alone. I've often wondered if the pain was worth it. The years of fear, the tears, the trauma. And now, after everything, I know that it was. The truth is out. The church, Father Michael, everything that we endured, is no longer hidden in the shadows. The lies have been exposed. Justice in some small way has been served. And though the scars remain, I can now live with the knowledge that I did not let those years of suffering go unspoken. But this journey has been more than just about justice. It has been about reclaiming my voice, reclaiming my life. For so long I allowed fear to control me, to silence me. I allowed the weight of my own guilt to convince me that I wasn't worthy of speaking out, that my pain didn't matter. But what I've learned, what I've finally come to understand, is that silence only allows evil to thrive. It only allows the abusers to win. We are not powerless. No matter how small or insignificant we may feel, we have a voice, and that voice has the power to bring about change. We cannot stay silent when we see injustice. We cannot ignore the suffering of others just because it's easier or safer. We must stand up. We must speak out. I know that my story is not unique. There are so many others who suffer in silence, who live in fear, who have been silenced by the very institutions that are supposed to protect them. But we cannot continue to hide. We cannot let the fear of consequences keep us from seeking justice. We cannot allow ourselves to be invisible any longer. And so I share this story with you, not just as a way to tell the truth about what happened to me, but as a call to action. To anyone who has ever been silenced, to anyone who has ever felt powerless, your voice matters. You are not alone. We are not alone. Together we can bring light to the darkness. We can expose the lies, and we can ensure that the truth is never buried again. If my story moved you, if you believe in the power of truth and the strength of speaking out, I ask you to leave a comment saying, "I believe." Your voice can help bring more truth to light, and it can inspire others to speak up as well. Don't let fear hold you back. Don't let silence be your prison. Please subscribe to this channel and join me in this journey to give voice to those who have been silenced. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can ensure that no one has to suffer in silence again.